times are coming if you just hold on.
Better times are coming if we just hold on. Hi, this is Laura Hedlund, and this is a Democracy Special sponsored by ACLU's People Power and Let People Vote. What is the role of dirty tricks in U.S. elections? And what can we learn from American history? How do we move towards that more perfect union with a vibrant, free, and fair and respected elections? We're going to talk all about this in a three-part series. Last week we had Joseph Cummings, author of Anything for a Vote, Dirty Tricks, Cheap Shots, and October Surprises and U.S. Presidential Elections. And he covered the period of time from the founding of the country to President Eisenhower. Today we're going to be talking about October Surprises from President Eisenhower to current times. And with us is ACLU's People Power and Let People Vote activist Shea Hansen. And also joining me is a co-host or host of Politics Matters, Bruce Klopfleisch. Hi.
Laura.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, Shea.
Shea, and that was also your song that started us off here. So tell us a little bit about why you think it's important for us to be aware of dirty tricks in politics.
I'm a member of a local group, Let People Vote, that we do a lot of voter registration, voter education, and what's gone on in the past influences what's going on today and what we need to alert people to and help people with. And so that was kind of how this got conceived.
And Bruce, tell us a little bit about your show and your background.
Sure. My show is called Politics Matters, and then the tagline for it is how civics, politics, and law affect you. So part of the reason why I'm doing this show is because I think the media isn't all that good when it comes to covering politics. But part of my show, I have civics in the name of it for a reason, because I think people need to be more educated on politics and realize that it does matter to them, even though they don't think it does. And part of it is obviously the elections. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. There's all sorts of things that can happen, either on purpose or just things just happen towards in October or even late September that can potentially at least affect the outcome of elections. So
before I started to prep for the show, I stumbled on something from the American Psychological Association about political stress. And it was saying things like a February 2024 Pew poll found that 65% of U.S. adults always or often felt exhausted by politics. 55% always felt angry. And so for many, politics has become a form of chronic stress. And one of their tips that they said is the more you know about civics, the less stressful it is.
Right. Mm. And I think, my background is I teach at the community college level. I teach political science and economics. And most of my students are high school students, PSEO students who a lot of them can't vote yet. I mean, they're not 18 yet, but there are some that can. So, part of what I'm teaching them is, involves civics, obviously, but also trying them to get, even before they can first vote, is to get them thinking about what they should be paying attention to and why politics really does matter to everybody.
And how to move it in a positive way, to have that politics of joy and that civic engagement. Shea, have you found politics fun?
I find that if I sit in my basement bedroom and talk to no one and watch nothing but the news, I get terribly, terribly depressed. But if I get out there and join together with other people and we're making a difference, it's joyful. It's great. I have met so many people that I admire so much.
That is beautiful. So now we can talk about dirty tricks, but we also don't want this to be a big bummer, or because it is important to know this history, but to also know it in a way, and I love the way you just described that, because know it in a way that's empowering, not depressing.
Yeah, and if you can, we went to the vice presidential debate watching party last night, and like you said, Shea, about getting out there with other people, not just being by yourself, and it's a lot harder to get bothered by politics if you're with other people, and you can talk about stuff, than just being by yourself. So,
in a lot of ways, I think that what's going on now is almost can be seen as a test of Americans' ability to come together And so it's more than just political. It becomes almost spiritual. Can we respect each other? Can we come together and make a better world?
I love that too. So, Should we start with 1968 presidential election? Hubert Humphrey. Some dirty tricks with that.
Well, this one involved the Vietnam War. At least one of them. This is definitely one of those elections. It was one of the closest ones in the end, and there was a third party in there for a while. Eugene McCarthy was in it for some time too. But one of the highlights for this one, as far as the October surprises goes, was there was Nixon, who eventually won, who eventually beat Humphrey, was worried that Humphrey would be able to get some sort of peace deal done shortly before the November election, which would help propel him to win the election. So Nixon basically went over to try and get the Vietnamese not to do any sort of peace deal and to let it keep going. So then he could bash Humphrey about, boy, this war, if you elect me, I'll end it, type of stuff. Nixon ended up winning.
I know. That is a really sad note. So Humphrey was rising in the polls sharply because that was due to the collapse of the George Wallace vote. And Hubert Humphrey was distancing himself from the Johnson administration on the Vietnam War. And then Nixon worked to prevent peace. How does that sit on you?
I understood that Nixon was the first one to use the Southern strategy. That is, that after the Voting Rights Acts were passed and segregation was enforced in the South, integration was forced in the South, there was a white backlash, which the Republicans then took advantage of, so that the parties flipped. The Democrats became the party where they had been the party of the South before. They became the party of black integration, and the Republicans took over the white backlash in the South. Is that correct? Do I have things at all in order there?
Yep. And Johnson even said that would happen. He predicted that would happen after he signed the Voting Rights Act.
Right, because the South, the Deep South, was strong Democratic, but Johnson did the voting right, and then the politics really shifted after that.
Yep. Because for a while the Democrats were the one that supported, if you want to call it that, discrimination against African Americans, and then after this was passed by Congress and signed by Johnson predicted it. Well, he said we lost the South for the next generation, and that happened.
It's still happening.
Still happening, yeah.
It's still happening.
Now, there's been some inroads in like Georgia recently. They got 2 Democratic senators there now, but yeah, that's where it happened.
So in 1972 with Nixon, Nixon was advocating for the end of the war, peace at hand, and there was a press conference less than 2 weeks before Election Day where Henry Kissinger was saying that peace is at hand, but yet the Vietnam War didn't come to an end for more than 2 years. That was another October surprise.
Yeah, Nixon was, Nixon won that election overwhelmingly, by the way. That's the one where, Watergate happened too. But Henry Kissinger was Nixon's Secretary of State. He went over there, said peace was at hand to, try and convince the Americans, Nixon's going to end the war, so let's vote for Nixon. But then it turns out, he didn't. Had no real intention of doing that. The bombings kept going on and everything else, and it took another 2.5 years before it finally ended.
So it's saying one thing while you intend and are knowledgeable of a different thing. It's that fundamental hypocrisy and cynicism.
Yep, and you see this, you've seen this throughout our history. This is nothing new. But a lot of people are just, when they hear some of the things that the politicians do, like, and that's what gets some of them mad about dealing with politics. They just don't like dealing with this kind of stuff. Because it does happen.
Yeah. We can jump ahead to 1980 and the American Iranian crisis. Did you want to say something else, Shea?
No. I think this is we're going into a particularly vicious period. It's amazing. We look at all this stuff, but it has such horrific consequences for human life.
It really does, especially, if Humphrey was elected and we ended that Vietnam War earlier. How many lives would have been saved? How much suffering? And then but in 1980, one of the things that was going on is that the Iran took the American hostages. Yep. And so what happened? What was the dirty trick around that?
Well, this was a time when Carter was president, and Iran took hostages, and what even some of the people that were there with Reagan have since said is that Reagan made a deal with the Ayatollah to keep the hostages because he thought, and there was some reporting that Carter was going to get the hostages released prior to the election, which would boost Carter's candidacy. So Reagan wanted to stop that. So he was talking with the Ayatollah and convinced them to wait to do anything. And then the election happens, and what happens? What happens?
Minutes after President Ronald Reagan was inaugurated in January of 1981, the hostages were released.
Right on schedule, right?
Right on schedule.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people denying that there was any deal and all this, but boy, I don't think it was a coincidence.
Yeah, so the strongest accusation came from former Ford and Carter National Security Advisor Gary Sick in the New York Times editorial in 1992. So him, with scores of other interviews, argued that individuals associated with the Reagan-Bush campaign of 1980 met secretly with Iranian officials to delay the release of the American hostages.
Mm-hmm. And they did. So while they're saying it's his fault, look at the bad thing he's doing, then they're negotiating behind to keep the hostages held longer. And again, it's unnecessary suffering. Any thoughts on that, Shea?
Well, at this point, we have been talking about Republican administrations and candidacy, and I just want to reiterate that this dirty dealings are bipartisan. So one never knows what the Democrats might come up with at any one time. And of course, we oppose any kind of unfair election tactics.
Without a doubt. So I know there was a release of Bush's DWI records right before, or the release of the Trump tapes right before the election. So, yeah, you're right. It's on all sides. It's kind of part of the...
Yeah, we'll be getting to those.
We'll be getting to those, yeah. All right, so let's jump ahead to 1992 and the Clinton. So that was a highly competitive three-way race, the 1992 race. So that was also...
Ross Perot.
Ross Perot
was in there, yep.
Ross Perot.
Yeah.
And so the Reagan Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberg was indicted for perjury during the Iran-Contra investigation in the mid-1980s, and the news broke just 4 days before the election.
Yeah, so this was George H.W. Bush, and, trying to get a second term, up against Clinton and up against Ross Perot. And, this whole Iran-Contra thing had been brewing for a while, had been in the press. People had been talking about why wasn't Ronald Reagan impeached for doing this, and, basically the Democrats let him get away with it. But here, this was a case where Casper Weinberger, who was a cabinet member of H.W. Bush. There was a special counsel appointed. Lawrence Walsh was the name, also a Republican, by the way, to investigate this. And he dropped an indictment on Weinberger 4 days before the election in 1992. And then, Clinton ended up winning that, in part because there was 3 people there. Perot got, a number of votes too. But before he left office, George H.W. Bush pardoned Weinberger for this. So, but yeah, this was 4 days before the election. A lot of people, bring this up, but what they don't know is that the special counsel was also a Republican. So,
yeah,
it wasn't like the Democrats tried to pull this off. It was a Republican. So.
Okay, then in 2000, Bush v. Gore. So again, one of the surprises was the cable news network reported that Bush was arrested for drunk driving in 1976, but that happened just days before the election.
Yeah, Bush. There was a lot of controversy around his background because he didn't really say a whole lot about it, and then this DWI thing came out. Now, if something like this came out today, nobody would really care.
Right.
Those were different times, certainly. You had this. You also had his National Guard service issue that came out as well during that election, and unfortunately, this is one where it wasn't really an October surprise, but the Supreme Court, gave him the election.
Right. That is the November surprise. Do you want to review the history of the hating? We were watching the votes in Florida flip back and forth, and I know someone really close to a lawyer is like, well, of course the Supreme Court's going to tell the states to count the votes, and they're not going to. It was very much against it, and I know it was an unsigned opinion that, said that Florida, that actually technically stopped the vote counting.
Right. So this was, literally this was like the state, because the election was that close between Bush and Gore. And just looking back, actually, they've later they counted the votes, and it turns out that Gore actually won the state of Florida and would have won the election. But this is where you heard of the hanging chads, right? And the Republicans, and Jeb Bush was the governor. The Republicans basically, before the election, did a dirty trick, and this is happening today too, is they kick a bunch of people off the voting rolls. And in this case, it was a bunch of African Americans that they kicked off the voting rolls in Florida. And so that was one thing, and then the hanging chads was another thing, and the Secretary of State was a Republican, and not surprisingly, the current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, was on the team for George Bush here. And I think Brett Kavanaugh was too, actually. So, there were, it was going to come down to Florida. So, lawsuits were filed. And the state of Florida initially heard the cases and basically said, yeah, go ahead and count. So that was the Florida state courts.
Right, the Florida Supreme Court said count the votes.
Count them, yep. And then, so what happens a lot is, well, the loser ends up saying, no, I'm going to go to federal court now. And so they did, and then, went to the Supreme Court ultimately.
Was Roberts head of the Supreme Court at that time?
No, he was working for George Bush's campaign.
Oh. Okay, and Kavanaugh, too. So they kind of got rewarded later.
Yep, exactly. Funny how that happens.
That's why I got to keep this on this. Because, a lot of this stuff is pretty depressing when you think of climate crisis we're now dealing with and the Iraq War, a lot of history a lot of bad things that might not have happened had we been able to count the votes.
Yeah, and this is something that I tell my students all the time about the court system, and especially the U.S. Supreme Court. They got a lot more power than you may think. I mean, this is what they literally did here was overturned an election. They said, don't count these legal votes anymore. And they just gave it to Bush.
Right. And again, it was an unsigned position. So they kind of knew what they were doing. It was against their values.
Yeah, and this is cited by a lot of legal scholars as one of the worst opinions by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And you can see why. If you actually read it, it's like, wow. It's like the immunity decision that Roberts did. He just made stuff up. To find this power that presidents have, with immunity. So, but yeah, that was one where this one was decided by a court. This is the U.S. Supreme Court. It wasn't, based really on the election itself.
I find this is subject matter is one of these things where you either have to laugh or cry. So I try to keep a sense of humor about it.
And I'm glad I listened to this thing from the American Psychological Report before I just kind of stumbled on it, because one of the things that the person on that one was saying is allow your feelings, allow the anger, allow the sadness, and allow the laughter. Don't try to suppress it or just because that kind of keeps us up here all worried, but just allowing ourselves to feel the things we feel. And to really look at the other side of that is the love and the hope that we know for what can be and our desire for a true democracy, right? Our people power, which is what, let people vote, let this power rise and the potential. And that's why I love your song. So you're listening more to the Hold On song. We're going to be taking a break and you are listening to a special election. This is with ACLU People Power and Let People Vote, Shea Hansen. We're also talking with the host of Politics Matters. And we'll be right back. And we're going to go out and you'll be hearing Shea's, the song she wrote. Hold on, it won't be long.
Better times are coming, better times are coming, if you just hold on. Now Moses went up in the mountain to pray, said, Lord, I'm lost, you gotta show me the way. Lord said, Moses, I wouldn't steer you wrong. Stick to these commandments and hold on, hold on. There's better times are coming, hold on. And it won't be long, hold on. There's better times are coming, better times are coming, if you just hold on. They put Dr. King in the Birmingham prison, kept him in, but they couldn't hold his vision. Said preach love and stand up against wrong. Come together and hold on. There's better times are coming, hold on. And it won't be long, hold on. There's better times are coming, better times are coming, if you just hold on.
Welcome back. This is Laura Hedlund, and you are listening to a Democracy Special, and it's sponsored by ACLU's People Power and Let People Vote. And we're joined with activist Shea Hansen, who is also the singer-songwriter of the song you're hearing, and also joining us is the host of Politics Matter. And so the first episode we covered early American history that was airing last week, and this week we're covering from Eisenhower to current times. And when we left off, we were on 2004. So 2004, what was going on, Bruce?
Well, I think the big one there was Osama bin Laden basically came on and said he was responsible for 9/11 during that time. And, this basically helped George Bush, his approval rating. This was during his re-election campaign, and he ended up winning that against John Kerry.
Right. So, John Kerry's ratings were going up because there was some news stories about missing arsenal of explosions. But then this video came out, and again, it was just days before the election, and there was a 6-point rise in the poll.
Wow.
Which at that time was enough to win, because that was a pretty close election. And I think that one might have come down to the state of Ohio, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So that was a close one, and
Seems like there was a campaign at that point too to denigrate John Kerry's military record.
The Swift voting, and that was 2008, right?
Right. they got some of his associates or something to say that he had I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but he had not been a hero.
Well, I remember Kerry one of the main points where he transitioned to entering into politics. We spoke very eloquently about the Vietnam War and who will be the last person to die for a mistake. He was a very powerful speaker, and he had a very strong Vietnam record. And then somehow they try to swift boat him. So do you want to talk about that?
Smear him.
Smear it.
Yeah, basically they tried to smear him, and they focused more on some of his testimony to Congress, where he was against the war. Even though he fought in it. So the Republicans really focused on that part of it. Not his record, but some of the stuff that he said. And then they got some military guys that come out that served with him allegedly. And I use that word on purpose. Allegedly served with him, and then they came out and said, basically what a bad military guy that he was, and that, obviously they were trying to get military people and basically to come out and say he was not a patriot, and it worked.
Yeah, it did work, and it's still being used right now. Governor Tim Walz served 24 years in the National Guard, and there's a lot of people that are saying, "Oh, that was fake valor because he didn't stay in long enough. He left right before the bad times came." That's sad. Yep. Ready to jump ahead to the Obama campaign. What dirty tricks do you guys remember about the Obama race?
Well, I mean, it was obvious race baiting, of course. Our first black president. So the fact that they were relying on the Southern strategy at this point worked to the benefit of the Republicans against Obama.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to bring up this. This isn't like an intentional October surprise, but this was also the election where the 2008 recession happened. In right around the election. So, McCain for a little while stopped campaigning. And because he went back to Washington D.C. because he was a senator at the time. They were trying to deal with how they're going to respond to the recession, and he got and the Democrats took advantage of this and did a lot of the negative ads against McCain and blaming him for the recession, tying it to Bush, and that worked.
And one of the news stories that came out right at the end was that Obama had a half-aunt who was living illegally in Boston, and even though she was ordered to leave the country in 2004. But Obama did win that election with 365 votes in the Electoral College and 52.9% of the popular vote. But there are a lot of issues going on. Like you said, the people are upset with the war, and then the stock market just had a dramatic fall.
Well, then there was the whole birther thing, remember?
Exactly.
He wasn't born in the United States.
Yeah, and guess who was one of the guys who started that? Donald Trump.
Sure.
So jump ahead to 2012. One of the election October surprises wasn't the result of political scheming, but Hurricane Sandy. And so that gave President Obama the opportunity to appear presidential while responding to a national emergency. Also, he was hugging Chris Christie. So that could have affected, and Obama, of course, won 2012 pretty substantially.
Yeah, and this sunk Chris Christie's ambitions to be president. He ran for the Republican nomination after that, but the Republicans basically turned their back on him after he did this. Which is a sad state of affairs because he's trying to help his constituents. After this storm, this hurricane, doing all he can do, and part of that is you got to get the federal government to help you out, and he pays the political price for doing this.
He was hobnobbing with the enemy, huh?
Yeah.
Another problem. Okay, 2016, Hillary Clinton.
But I got one more there.
Go for it.
This is the election in 2012 where Mitt Romney's famous 47% statement came up. In the fall before the election, where he basically said, 47% of the people are, freeloaders, government freeloaders and that type of thing. So that was played over and over and over and over.
And that was a secret recording of something he was saying to very affluent donors.
Right.
47%. So if you're over 65, you may not be paying taxes.
Yeah.
If you're, a young person, if you're making not that much money, you don't pay taxes. So it's those. So 50. The top 1% carry a very strong tax burden, and that's what Mitt Romney was saying. But yeah, that became a dominant theme.
Yep.
So Hillary Clinton. So what's dirty tricks you want to remember about the 2016 Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump election?
Well, there were many. I'll just take one to start with, and then Shea can come in on some other stuff. But actually, there's two for me that kind of stand out. One of them is, but her emails, emails, and national security, and all that stuff about Hillary's emails. Okay, that was one thing. But then you had the FBI, James Comey, the FBI director, comes out with a letter like a few days before the election saying, I'm going to investigate her because one of her aides' husbands got in trouble for solicitation or something, and they were checking her computer for that. And then you heard emails and emails again, right? And I think this really hurt Clinton in that election.
It really did, especially right when it came out. FBI is really investigating Hillary after it was charged for a long time.
Yep.
Shea, did you?
This is the election, I think, that we have to note really an intensification of the strategy of misinformation. Trump's rather brilliant approach to really instructing his followers by repeating lies over and over and over again until people believe them. That's become a strategy, I think, that's permeated a lot of, particularly the Republican political stances from then on. And I think at that point also disenfranchisement became a whole science of different techniques, calling people up, robocalls and saying, you have to do this or that, otherwise your vote won't count, and people not bothering to vote then, and this kind of thing, all kinds of shenanigans going on with disenfranchising people.
Yeah, and the stuff with the Russian government, too.
Yeah, and I was trying to remember the name. I couldn't believe I can't remember right now. I'm kind of trying to do a quick search, but the whole controversy around like the Facebook and the private information and how that was sort of targeted with possibly Russia behind it as well. But I'll see if I can remember it. Maybe we're going to do another show next week, so I will do my check-in and see if I can remember, because there's so much with that. And then there's also Pizzagate. So we haven't mentioned Pizzagate. So what was Pizzagate?
Oh, yeah.
Bruce, so you remember Pizzagate?
Yeah. Well, speaking of disinformation, there's all kinds of stuff that Trump was putting out, and Republicans were putting out that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats are in some mysterious pizza shop somewhere.
The basement.
Basically eating kids.
And sex trafficking.
Yeah, sex trafficking.
I mean, it was, and this is like the Q, whatever it's called, and there was QAnon, and there was a lot of people genuinely believe that stuff, and it's in some ways it seems like, how can you believe all that stuff? But in other ways, these people, that is the reality that they were living in, and so for them, they were honestly saving the children.
And someone actually went to Washington, found that pizza shop, for the intention of killing Clinton, and it turned out, because it was said that this was going on in the basement of this pizza shop, turned out there was no basement to this pizza shop, and the guy was just arrested. But how scary.
It is. So, okay, what do you want to say about Biden-Trump 2020? I know there was a laptop that showed up at the end, and
well, yeah, this is Hunter Biden's famous now laptop, and that he had given to somebody, and then it got stolen, and allegedly showed how him and Joe Biden were getting rich, from various foreign governments, and all this sort of stuff that, of course, has never happened.
Right. The Ukraine, the gas pipeline, and in Ukraine,
and led to, at least was part of the famous call that Trump made to Vladimir Zelensky, and trying to get dirt on Joe Biden. So this was just part of that whole thing. And then this was also shortly before this election is where Trump and Melania tested positive for COVID. So they've been blasting COVID, and then they ended up getting it. And Trump was pretty sick, as it turns out.
Okay, so we've covered history. Any other tidbits that you feel like we're really missing?
I wonder if it wouldn't be interesting to look at last week. Mr. Cummins was talking about the earlier periods, 19th century, how character assassination was actually almost theater, and people enjoyed it, and he said that the character assassination that's going on these days would be no surprise to those people. They would feel completely at home with it. But I wonder if we have to consider that there's a qualitative difference between what was happening then and what's happening now in terms of smearing people, because with the internet, it gets amplified so much, and people get boxed into their own perspectives, and it's not funny anymore.
Well, yeah, because a lot of the stuff that's going out now is actually promoting violence, and people are taking it seriously now.
Yes, taking it seriously. The whole eating pets thing.
Yeah, and that eating pets thing, I think, comes to our core is that a lot of us really, really, really love our dogs and cats, and their safety is paramount in our lives. I mean, we're threatening the safety of our dogs and cats. For a lot of people, it's like threatening the safety of your kid. So this idea of the political use of fear and manipulation, and there's a PBS, if anyone wants to check it out, a PBS on the politics of fear and how it manipulates us to tribalism. So there's a long-standing history of the fear of the others. Its roots are really deep, and it's in our psychological and our biological being. And so demagogues especially can really manipulate these feelings. Even this thing, both teams kind of pray for their team to win, even in a sporting thing. So you hope that God will take a side in a game. But we regress to tribalism when afraid. So having people be afraid is a way of gaining power, and gaining power is a way of gaining money and resources in our society.
I hate to resort to altruism, but seems to me the counteraction of that is for all of us globally to think of ourselves not as a part of our tribe or even our reason or nation, but as a global citizen. And then we'd all be the same tribe.
I totally agree with you, and I will do it even cosmic citizen and citizen of all sentient beings, and so when we can ground ourselves on the world's alive and the trees are alive, and we can ground ourselves in this different space of being. I know. But actually. But, okay, so one of the other things this sentence said is that U.S. and media and social media, they almost work as disaster-prone, triggering our emotions. And this type of stress reality is not a healthy thing.
Oh, no, it's not. And, this is what the Republicans are running on. It started even before Trump, but since Trump came down the escalator and all that. I mean, that's totally what he's been.
And some people would say
on.
the Democrats are doing the same thing. In fact, and this is like it's, I don't want to say one hand clapping, but Ubuntu, what you do, that what we do to the other, we're actually doing to ourselves. But so yeah, we are kind of caught in this fear paradigm, and I like what you were saying or what you're pointing to, Shea, about the way out of this tribalism is maybe some spaciousness, some love. It shows up in your songs, and so this atmosphere and trying to plant and seed the atmosphere of what we want. And I think it's good to resort to idealism. I like Ellie's show here on idealism as well. So,
well, I wonder, we do have real problems in the United States, globally, for heaven's sakes, that need to be addressed and cannot be ignored. They're not going to go away just because we snap our fingers or because we decide let's all be nice. So it's kind of fine to designate between being fear-mongering and being positive about what we can do when we all get together. I think that many of the problems that we have can be solved, and we can have a positive attitude towards those kinds of things, but we have to work at it.
And I think this is what Harris is trying to do with her campaign right now. I think is this is why she keeps talking about joy and love and those sorts of themes, which is different than a lot of presidential candidates have run on before. And since she's got in, and we've had this, she hasn't been running all that long, comparatively speaking. I think the results speak for themselves so far. I mean, Biden was way down, and now she, depending on what poll you look at, I mean, she's up nationally. She's up in most of the swing states. Now, granted, a lot of the polls are within the margin of error, but at least she's there. Yeah. And I think part of the reason that she's there is because she's talking more positively and about trying to get stuff done and how being joyful can help the average person, the middle class people, and build from the bottom up instead of going from the up to the down.
Yeah. So the negatives can have with so many of us feeling exhausted by politics, that has a negative effect on our health. But we can also feel positive about our politics, and one of the ways to do that is to actually work. Now we only have about 2 minutes left, and do we want to briefly touch on what dirty tricks might be happening now? And
well, there are a number of things that people are concerned about. Of course, any attempts in Georgia in order to get the local officials to hold up the count, which would could put the decision in the House. Republicans would want to do anything possible to get the decision thrown into the House of Representatives, because for that each state would get one vote, and there are more small red states than there are, and the blue states tend to be bigger. So if it's thrown in the House, Trump would automatically win. That kind of thing, and a lot of disenfranchisement going on. There are vigilante groups in Texas running around kicking in doors to scare people. I mean.
Yeah,
it's wild what's going on.
They're going after the Latino heads of some of the Latino interest groups and action groups down in Texas.
There's also the possibility that Mike Johnson could hold up the seating of the newly elected representatives in the House. He's allowed to do that, which would throw it into the House again. Yeah, we need to really stay alert and watch for these things, and not necessarily believe what one side or the other is putting out, but think for ourselves about what's really going on, and if there's any underhanded stuff that could be determining the election.
Well, some people are saying that the port strike and all the conflict in the Middle East is also designed to manipulate the election. So we're down to the last minute. We want to hear more of your song, Shea Hansen, ACLU, People Power, and Let People Vote. Thank you so much,
And
Bruce.
that song is going up on YouTube really soon with a video.
With a
in
video.
case anybody's interested.
Nice.
Great. And Bruce, you want to say again when people can listen to your show?
Yes, the Politics Matter show is on Sundays from 5 to 6, or you can, on any podcast that you use after that. So.
Great. And we're going to have one more show the next Sunday at 9 o'clock. You've been listening to an election special. I'm Laura Hedlund. And let's hold on. Better days are coming. Democracy works. It's kind of a bummer, but if we can have some fun with it, too, then it works a lot better. Cynicism and all that. Let's just shake out all that negativity, man. Let's just shake it out. And while we're still aware of it, because there's too much suffering in this world, let's make it better.